So it seems that we've got a rather big Warhammer 40K rules update today. New datasheets for the Space Wolves and Tau, the full datasheets and points cost for the Ultramarines, a new Ultramarine Gladius detachment, and a few other small rules changes besides. Let's take a look at what we've got. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking about the Warhammer 40k rules changes and doing a summary of Games Workshop's digital rules update, which largely revolves around the new models, datasheets and detachments they've just released. This was an update that we were expecting. Games Workshop said that the new Ultramarines things would come out after the World Championships, so this Wednesday did seem quite likely for those. They revealed the general datasheets for them, but not the points cost, so we didn't really know how strong they were looking, and it seemed at least pretty possible that we get the new datasheets for the Wolf Scouts and Stealth Suits at the same time, unless they were a bit weirdly delayed like the Necrons and the Deathwatch were. It seems that we now have full datasheets and points costs for all of those units as well, plus the Ultramarines have indeed got a unique detachment in a different version of the Gladius, and it seems that we had a few other small rules corrections as well to some of the more recent datasheets, updating some keywords for the Deathwatch, Decimus and Aquila team, plus Aethon Shaan having a tiny ruling change, though both of these more just seem for rules intent than any sort of balance kind of purposes. There's also a combat patrol rule set for the Ultramarines one, featuring Chief Librarian Tigurius. Let's talk through the rules though, starting with the Space Marines and their new detachment, then going on to Space Wolves and Tau, and then the other stuff. First up for the Ultramarines, they do indeed have a new detachment associated with one of their new characters. We've had the same for the other chapters that released in this release wave. I was wondering whether or not they might save the Ultramarine ones for that first installment in 500 Worlds, but it seems not. While a couple of the others got a unique first company detachment around their Terminator characters, for the Ultramarines it seems they just went for one that you'd expect and did a version of the Gladius task force. And on paper that has the potential to be a very strong combo indeed, Gladius being one of the single strongest Space Marine detachments to the point where it's used by a bunch of Divergent chapters quite a lot, and Ultramarines being one of the single strongest chapters from the core codex. The main buff that this new version of Gladius gets is some enhanced combat doctrines if Marneus Calgar is on the table. These are called Mastered Doctrines, and these are the same three as they are normally. Advance and Shoot army-wide, Advance and Charge army-wide, and Fall Back, Shoot and Charge army-wide. The difference is that if Marneus Calgar is on the battlefield, you can select one in a later turn that you've already selected in a previous one. That means that should you wish it, you could have potentially 3 turns worth of Advance and Charge, or 3 turns of Advance and Shoot, or I guess theoretically double dip on Tactical, though that one probably seems like the least likely. Despite being able to recycle them, you don't get game-long combat doctrines still though. It's still on just 3 command phases that you can select one, so it doesn't just translate into Gladius with Advance and Charge all game long like Stormlance. This one is really quite a major advantage for the detachment. It means that you can react to the situation turn on turn and decide what's best, and might mean that you're a bit less likely to spend a command point on Advance and Charge for a unit perhaps. Overall no bad thing at all, and certainly helps that Marneus Calgar's already a strong model that makes his way into a whole bunch of Ultramarines lists anyway. It's not really a unit that most would consider attacks, and it does have a new way to play him now, so has even more options than before. For stratagems and enhancements, the vast majority are pretty well the same. I feel like out of any of the Space Marine detachments, Gladius is maybe one of the ones that felt least in need of fixing. You have your normal Lance with extra AP and Assault Doctrine, ignores cover with extra AP and Devastator Doctrine, reactive move that gets boosted in Tactical, changing out the doctrines for another one to flex them out and have different units being able to access different ones at different sides of the battlefield, and then the standard reliable Armour of Contempt. The changed one is swapping out the 2 command point Fights on Death for a stratagem called Tactical Foresight. This one's the biggest thing that maybe makes the Gladius a side grade. Fights on Death is definitely a useful stratagem to have, though I would say it's maybe a little bit less impactful for Ultramarines compared with other chapters more melee focused, at least for the units that they've typically tended to field before. I guess maybe if you have Victrix Honor Guard being fielded in big numbers, perhaps the Fights on Death could be a bigger loss than before. I really wouldn't be too surprised if we see people both running this and regular Gladius. In any case, in the Blade of Ultramar, you lose that stratagem and swap it out for a -1 to wound. This one's quite a powerful -1 to wound one command point for -1 to wound against attacks that are greater or equal strength to your toughness, so you could use it say against strength 4 attacks against toughness 4 Space Marines and have them wound on a 5. That one is going to have some competition with Armour of Contempt. A lot of the time Armour of Contempt is going to be better, or it might not be the biggest gain in the world if Armour of Contempt gives you a similar sort of durability buff. It does give you more options though. You could double down with both of them to just make one unit ridiculously hard to shift for a turn, and that could be a really big deal for say something like the new Victrix Guard out in the open after having destroyed something. And sometimes it will just directly be better than Armour of Contempt. Say for example if you had Intercessors taking a bunch of strength 4 attacks, often it's going to be a greater durability buff to use this than Armour of Contempt. Then finally we've got the enhancements where there's just one other small change. The first 3 enhancements are all the same as they were, including the points cost, just with different names. The Artificer armor is renamed Armor of Antonius, giving you a 2+ save and a 5+ feel no pain, handy enough for an extra tough character, and kind of weirdly often used on a lone Gravis captain to make a weirdly tough single marine. Othar McCrag is the renamed Honor Vehement, +1 to attack and strength in melee, or +2 in the Assault Doctrine. I guess that maybe gets a bit better if you might have multiple turns worth of Assault Doctrine. And then Veteran of Behemoth is the Fire Discipline one, with sustained hits and re-rolling advanced rolls in Devastator Doctrine. A pretty usable damage buff, maybe on a Lieutenant with Hellblasters being the single most common place I've seen it. Units like Stoneguard and Eradicators are also reasonable choices though. The buffed one is the one that nobody really took so much before. It's called Student of the Codex here, basically swapping this unit into Tactical Doctrine if the bear is on the battlefield at the start of the turn. And this version's a bit better without so much awkward wording. It does just basically mean that your unit flips into fallback, shoot and charge whenever you need it now. The previous version could only use it if the rest of your army wasn't using one of the combat doctrines, which just made it very limited in use indeed. I feel like that's really quite a nice buff to that one. Though it still feels kind of situational, as fallback, shoot and charge is something that doesn't come up every game, and you can always flex into it for a 1 command point stratagem if you need it. Overall though, this one definitely has the potential to be a very powerful detachment. A fairly straightforward core rules buff to give you multiple turns of those doctrines and give you more powerful movement options army-wide. Certainly doesn't hurt that Marneus Calgar is an already good model. The -1 to wound stratagem is potentially useful, though fights on death for 2 command points could be a really big deal with the Victrix Honor Guard on the scene now. Overall seems like a solidly useful and powerful version of Gladius. It should be interesting to see what winds up as getting taken more out of these two. I certainly guess lots of people will prefer to take this one, but maybe with Victrix Honor Guard it could be a little bit more balanced. Before we get onto the new datasheets though, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Titan's Terrain. One option to get a battlefield worth of 40k terrain on the board. They're doing things a bit differently to most with their folding cardboard terrain system. The idea behind their stuff is that you basically have 12 tiles to make a 3x4 grid. That makes a board of 45 by 60 inches, the right size for 1000 point or 2000 point Warhammer 40k. And then each of those cardboard tiles unfolds and up pops a building, basically giving you an entire battlefield that can store completely flat. The main advantage of that is that compared with just about any other terrain set, it folds down smaller and more easily for transport and storage. So its main appeal is being just super easy to, say, take around to a friend's house without needing big boxes, or for those who don't have loads of space to store bulky terrain sets at home and need something that can fold down to a very small space indeed. They do have a few different designs and flavours of it. I'll talk through those briefly at the end of the video. I'll also mention a few pros and cons as well. There's definitely a few trade-offs versus other terrain sets out there. Check them out in the video description if you'd like to take a look though, and thanks to them for sponsoring this one. Next up, let's talk through the Ultramarines datasheets now we know the points cost for them. First up, we have the new Victrix Honor Guard, sold in box sets of 3 with the base loadout being on the right here, and then having the option to assemble one as this rather glorious chapter banner, and one can be equipped to the chapter champion with some paired combat blades. It seems the points cost for these dangerous Ultramarine elites has been revealed at 130 points for 3 of them, or 210 points for 6. I did think that there might be a chance that the bigger squad was a smaller points cost, given that you already have the copy of the Ancient and Champion, and out of those two it does seem to me that the 6-strong squad in particular seems like an absolutely great deal. 3 models with this stat line at 80 points seems like an absolutely amazing deal to me, and overall it does look like a pretty efficient melee unit indeed. I guess the second and third unit that you might take of these will have some slight diminishing returns given that you don't get multiple copies of the chapter banner or chapter champion, but even with the base loadout at 210 points, seems like they could be good enough to be interesting. The profile for these is 4 wounds at toughness 4 with a 2+ save, so pretty big chunky stats for around about 36 points per model, and while they have a character leading them, they're -1 to wound as well, overall making the unit quite solid and hard to take down. They'll do very well with Armour of Contempt, and they get OC2 as well, so have a fair bit of OC weight on objectives. For their weapons, they actually get an interesting bit of shooting with Strength 4, AP 1 and Damage 2, sort of Custodian Guardian Spear style, with Damage 2 attacks that will actually chip in more than you might expect against certain targets, so obviously melee is going to be their major thing. 5 attacks each at Strength 5, AP 2 and Damage 2, all hitting on a 2+ as well. Once per game the chapter banner gives you an extra strength and attack, so 6 attacks at Strength 6 there, which seems fairly scary, and the champion gets a slightly boosted profile at 6 attacks base with both precision and twin links. Between the lot of them for 210 points, that's a fairly staggering amount of Damage 2 attacks. Then for their special rule they get a Surge move, which is pretty scary on a unit that's quite this dangerous. You get to move d6 inches towards the nearest enemy when one shot down in the shooting phase, meaning that the opponent can't put units too close to them if they want to shoot them and inflict casualties, otherwise they might just wind up in combat and unable to shoot them anymore. Overall, these guys look pretty terrifying for 210 points for the squad, potentially 37 attacks at Strength 6, AP 2 and Damage 2 in the banner turn, never mind any attached characters they have on top of that, and to me that seems far above what you might expect for 210 points. Characters can add all sorts of interesting things, including that -1 to wound debuff. Pretty much all the Ultramarine characters seem interesting enough. Either Cato Sicarius or just the regular Captain Sicarius datasheet could be particularly interesting with the reactive move. It means that you could move up super close to an enemy unit and then have a very good chance to surge move into combat with them if you wanted to. Calgar also seems good and could add yet more weight to the unit if you take the Gravis Armor Victrix datasheet. That'd be an 8 squad of Victrix along with Calgar, and you could have both in the unit for a big 470 points. If just using Sicarius or a Captain or something, you could use transports like an Impulsor to deliver them out of. That'd be a massive amount of threat into one cheap transport, and they're just going to be a massively efficient units to make use of any stratagems on, things like Lance and AP and Gladius, or reactive moves or Armour of Contempt. It does seem at first impressions that these are going to be absolutely auto-includes for Ultramarine lists. Of course, they've got other new datasheets as well. The first one for Cato Sicarius with his new role as the head of the Victrix Honor Guard. He's got a rather nice new model with a helm that fits in with the rest of that squad. His datasheet did have some very significant buffs compared with the Captain Sicarius datasheet that preceded it, though he does cost a big 120 points now, and this new version can only lead the Victrix Honor Guard, not other things. As suspected, it does seem that you can either field this guy or the other Sicarius datasheet, as he's still printed in the Codex. I'd guess that they'll just consolidate down to one of them next time there's a Space Marine Codex out, but for the meantime you now have the choice of this 120 point version, or the regular Captain Sicarius version with his reactive move that can join more units. For this version's rules though, you get a 5 wound captain with a 2+ save. He has quite a lot more melee threat than his previous one, with the option for 4 attacks at Strength 6, AP 3 and Damage 3 with devastating wounds, or 2 other damage modes that will be good against 2 wound and 1 wound infantry. That reactive move of 6 inches definitely is a powerful ability, and as mentioned seems to be very good with the Victrix Honor Guard, and this version also has 0 CP Heroic Intervention as well. Again, that could be a really big deal on such a big threatening unit with the Victrix. Overall, he absolutely does seem interesting, though admittedly he is more points cost than I would have guessed for him. I guess it really just does depend on whether or not that enormous reactive move for free is going to be worth the price of admission. Otherwise he does have good melee, but other characters do have good melee as well. Perhaps the main issue might be that he's not really doing things that other stratagems couldn't do. At least in Gladius you get a d6 inch reactive move, and Heroic Intervention again is something that you can use on the unit when it makes sense to. You don't necessarily need a character. Ultramarines do tend to have at least a fair amount of free stratagems going as well, whether they're led by Calgar or Guilliman. The Victrix Guard looking quite so strong definitely is great news for him. Seems that they'd be a really powerful unit almost no matter what character that you put with them. As mentioned though, you could always field him as the previous datasheet for 85 points if you just wanted a character to add in that reactive move into the Victrix Guard. You just wouldn't be able to put him into some enormous super unit with Marneus Calgar as well. Finally for the Ultramarines, speaking of which, we now have 2 Calgar datasheets. You can either field the regular Marneus Calgar and Gravis Armor with the Victrix Guard, the model that's gone off sale. He remains at his 200 points, and then the new Calgar with his Terminator Armor of Antilochus, that one's now 140. Again, unless they decide to re-release Gravis Calgar, which seems very unlikely, I strongly suspect that this version of him will probably go to Legends with the next Codex Space Marines, unfortunately, which I think will be a shame to lose more mainstream rules for those Victrix Guards he has with him. I guess if not using Legends datasheets, I guess they'll most likely be representing Fancy Blade Guard. As mentioned, new Calgar is 140 points, so basically you drop 60 points by not having those 2 Victrix Guards with him, and his datasheet gains a few other things that he can lead. This version can lead Terminators and Assault Terminators, and also the new Victrix Guard, though the old Calgar still can as well, given that Chapter Masters can attach to them. Otherwise he also has the Terminator keyword, which could be relevant for the odd stratagem in First Company. For his in-game profile, he hasn't really changed all that much, aside from the loss of his guards. Being in Terminator armor, he's gained Deep Strike, so if you're fielding in Terminators, then you won't be stopped from using that. His stat line is completely unchanged, with the slightly unusual Terminator toughness of 6. I guess they've just done that to stop there being some very mild profile confusion between him. Most Terminator characters tend to have toughness 5. His weapon profile's unchanged, with a bunch of twin linked strength 8 and damage 3 attacks, and his special rules are both unchanged as well, essentially getting all the combat doctrines in one and active all the time, and Master Tactician to generate command points, though it only works if he's your warlord, so Guilliman isn't present. As we've seen, he's got one extra draw in the new Ultramarines detachment, allowing you to repeat combat doctrines. Overall, at least for the time being, he's going to function as a variant datasheet that you could choose if you want to run him but not with the guards. At initial impressions, it feels like the Victrix guards are probably worth the extra 60 points that you charge. They're both really quite strong models with good saves and a whole bunch of fighty attacks in melee, 5 attacks each with damage 2. And with them in the unit, it allows you for interesting combos with the company heroes, making them an overall very well-rounded and fighty unit, which is where he normally tends to get fielded. It is interesting that Calgar of both flavours can join the Victrix guard though, and that means that you could have Gravis Calgar leading up a squad of 8 Victrix guards, and then maybe if you wanted absolutely maximal investment, you could add Primaris Cato Sicarius on top of that, and that'd be a monstrously dangerous unit of 530 points and 10 models, plus with just about all the movement shenanigans that you can possibly want. It'll be interesting to see what sort of combos get built around. The big all-in combos do look viable to me at first impressions, even with a huge asking price, though I suspect that you might get more overall utility out of say 2 units of Victrix side by side with cheaper characters. Overall certainly looks like a pretty massive and probably unneeded power boost to Ultramarines though. Next up, let's move on to the kill team datasheets, and first up we have the Wolf Scouts. As we know, there's 5 in the squad, plus their Hunting Wolf. Here are 7 of the different builds though, showcasing a good variety of their war gear. It seems that this new unit of Wolf Scouts costs 105 points for 6 models, including the Hunting Wolf, and they can be fielded in a doubled up squad of 10 Space Marines plus 2 Wolves for 210 points. For the 105 points, you get 5 Space Marines with the standard 2 wound and 3+ save profile, given that they're in Phobos armour, and they have the Space Wolf boosted movement of 7 inches and OC1. It does seem that they get both of the Scout style special abilities. Infiltrating into the midboard means that they'll be competing with the Space Marine options that do that, and then they have Scout 7 inches, so even further than the regular Scouts, which is really quite nice to combine with Infiltrators, as it means that you can deploy them aggressively and maybe fade them back behind a wall or something if the opponent gets first turn. Either that or step up to be more aggressive. They have the Phobos keyword, which can be relevant for some detachments like Vanguard. They've got the option to use the Smoke Stratagem as another interesting durability one, and it doesn't look like they can have any characters attached to them. There's no provision for attaching Phobos characters here. Then for the 6th member of the squad, we have the Hunting Wolf. This one has the same sort of profile as, say, the Wolfguard Head Takers ones, though this one doesn't split off from the unit and just remains attached to the squad, and that will be genuinely quite useful for them. It means that with a 10-inch move, if you wanted to, say, charge a target, the Wolf could be ranging out the front, keeping within 2-inch engagement range, and then using its big base to get far closer to the enemy, which means that if you want to charge a unit a fair way away, then the Wolf means that you could more reliably hit units that otherwise you probably just couldn't. The big base will also mean that it's easier to fight within base of base. Overall, looks like he'll help out the unit in quite a big way there. He does only have 2 attacks rather than the 3 that the Head Takers get, and otherwise could be a fairly expendable model to take hits for the unit, maybe tanking something like a big las cannon or melter shot before killing a Marine. The Wolf itself doesn't get any OC unless there's Space Marine characters nearby, but that's not exactly a big issue given that the rest of the squad do get that. Perhaps slightly surprisingly, the base loadout for the squad is Plasma Pistol and Combat Blade. I hadn't realised that would be the way from the sprues. In the model showcase, they only had the one that was armed with that loadout. Having a bunch of plasma fire in the unit certainly won't hurt at all, means their pistols will actually chip into killing enemy infantry. Though as ever with plasma weapons, if it's just the one plasma shot, you might seriously think twice about overcharging against suboptimal targets, as you might wind up doing more damage to your Space Marines than the enemy. The combat knives they get are like the Scout ones, but with +1 attack as they're fully fledged Space Marines, I guess. So they'll hit home with a bunch of Strength 4, AP 1 and Damage 1 attacks, quite nice for blending their equivalent skirmish infantry. And the pack leader sergeant gets a power weapon, 4 attacks with a slightly boosted profile there. It's just a regular power weapon though, not any sort of relic weapon. Then though, and as with the Deathwatch, they have a bunch of options for specialists, most of which seem taking. The Rune Priest has to bin off his plasma pistol, but in exchange he gets a runic staff and a Thunderclap psychic power. Thunderclap's a psychic blast weapon with D3 shots that hits enemies within 12 inches, and those hits are at strength 5, AP -1 and damage 2. It's not going to do much against heavies, but nice enough against infantry, and he's got a runic stave that gives the unit a damage D3 melee attack. Interestingly, it doesn't look like he confers the Psyker keyword to his unit, so it's not going to make them more vulnerable to certain anti-Psyker weapons. Otherwise, one can just simply take a Haywire Mine in addition, similar to the Primaris Incursors. This one's a genuinely good damage thing, triggered at the start of any phase when the enemy is within 3 inches of the bearer. Or 2+ they take D3 wounds, or 2D3 if it's a vehicle unit. That means the squad can take a surprising chunk out of a vehicle that gets too close if desired. Then you can swap out one plasma pistol for a plasma gun, and it doesn't look like that guy has to sacrifice his combat blade, so again looks like auto include there. And then finally for the Instigator Bolt Carbine, you can only take that if the squad has 12 models, as it's the alternate build from the Sergeant, and that just gets you a single sort of sniper shot. Unlike the Eliminators, doesn't look like it gives the squad a secondary movement, so maybe not the most interesting in the world. Then finally for their special rule, they get Deadly Stalkers. This one's a +1 to wound against enemies that aren't within 6 inches of enemy units, so it is going to depend a bit on how the opponent set up their army and how they're choosing to advance their models. There's plenty of times that that won't trigger, but there's a fair few times that it will. And it means that these guys are just going to be extra savage on it, jumping on things that move up to the midboard, maybe making sure that you can hit trading units extra hard. They don't get the return to reserves that the standard scout squad has though, so it's certainly a trade-off. Overall, at first impressions, they do seem like an interesting unit, though it does feel like the onus is on them to really sell themselves over cheaper infiltrate units. Often in 40k, you just want infiltrate units to be absolutely cheap and just there to do objectives and be expendable. And scout squads are certainly far more expendable than these guys are at 35 points cheaper. If their job is literally just to do a secondary objective and then die, then the scouts will be better for that. The extra 35 points basically upgrades you into a far more threatening unit though. I wouldn't say they're really tougher per point after that increase. The 3+ save and the extra wolf body don't hurt though, but they will be able to get around the table faster. They've got +1 movement and +1 to their scout range, and then the wolf ranging out the front of them will mean that it can shorten charges by a pretty significant distance, so they will be far more scary and threatening to jump on an enemy unit turn 1 if they really want to. Then when they get there, they're far more threatening than the scout squad. The Haywire Mine can chip in some mortal wounds. They have more melee attacks and a power weapon in the unit. The plasma pistols will chip in some damage, plus whatever the rune priest can do. And if it triggers, that +1 to wound rule is really quite a significant one as well, though it's not always going to be in effect depending on how the opponent has set out their units. Overall, I think there's enough there to be pretty interesting, and they absolutely seem strong enough for using casual play. I do wonder whether or not they're going to make the cut in optimised lists or not though. While they gain lots in damage output, they do lose a fair bit in utility for the points cost, at least compared with the scouts. Next up, for the last new datasheet, we have the stealth suits. These ones basically being the updated version of the squad that came before, along with their new models that came out in Kill Team, perhaps sort of halfway between the XV25 stealth suits and the XV15s, maybe having a few nods to, say, the Ghost Kill battle suit. It seems that the points cost on these guys is 110 points, and you can only have 5 of them, no more, no less. You can't block them up into an enormous unit of 10 or something. Previously, the unit was 80 points for 3 of them, or 120 points per 6, often taken just as the 80-point unit, as the biggest value of them was spotting targets and giving your Tau army reroll ones to hit and wound against them. Not having the option to be taken in a smaller unit is a bit of a blow, and it only being 10 points cheaper than the previous bigger one, despite losing an entire stealth suit, is also possibly a nerf as well from that. I feel like paying an extra 10-point premium for a stealth suit profile model is well worth it. For the basics of the unit, they really haven't changed so much. The stat line's the same, they still move 8 inches and are an infantry battlesuit unit, 2 wounds at toughness 4 with a 3+ save, and the stealth keyword, unsurprisingly. They can still infiltrate, though often in Tau lists choose not to, given that you need to keep that damage buff safe. And they have had some keywords changed around. They just get the marker-like keyword for the unit now. It's not just conferred by the drone. And it looks like the guy who's throwing the demolition charges around gives the units the grenade keyword, which they didn't have previously. That's generally not too bad to be able to rustle up an extra punch of damage at close range if they are doing some skirmishing with something that's above their weight. The weapon profiles are unchanged from before. In this unit you now get 2 fusion guns per 5 of them. Previously it was 1 per 3, so it feels like out of the 6 strong squad you've lost 1 burst cannon. In general they're not really going to be powerhouse damage dealers though, more capable of taking a chunk out of lighter enemy units that fall within range for them. The squad leader Shazvir gets a pulse pistol profile now, though it seems kind of unlikely that he'd ever necessarily want to actually fire it. In general, if you're out of combat, you'd want to shoot his main weapon system. If you're in melee, then you probably want to fall back a lot of the time. So I guess potentially that could allow you to spot units while in melee, I think, given that the squad would be eligible to shoot if they had a pistol. So I suppose might give you an incentive to keep them there and have one last desperate turn of damage buffs. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong though down in the comments. For the drones on the Shazvir, they get just the 2 that they come with. Doesn't look like they can flex them out at all. 1 gun drone and 1 marker drone. Seems like the marker drone's fairly pointless given that the entire unit gets a marker light anyway. I think the unit in general gets the keyword due to one of the miniatures being modelled with one. I guess that doesn't necessarily change hugely from what you might have taken before. Some folks might have taken the shield drone instead of the gun drone before, I suppose. And then finally their special rules are unchanged since the previous datasheet. They still have their pretty massive guiding buff, allowing you to reroll ones to hit and wound against their marked targets, spotting for the rest of the army in style. It's going to be best against bigger stuff where you can really focus firepower with lots of guns, and a bit less meaningful for the Tau datasheets that already have rerolls built in of one sort or another. The price of accessing this rule is higher now though. Previously you could have it in the army for 80 points, now you're going to need to dedicate an 110 point unit to use it, so it has got less efficient on that ground. Otherwise they still keep their 0 CP rapid ingress, they can do that once per game with the homing beacon, still potentially useful. and it looks like the one guy who could take a battlesuit support system to fall back and shoot just doesn't have that rule on the datasheet anymore. I guess it was a nice to have, though maybe not the be-all and end-all. Overall, I must admit, when it's all taken together, it does look like this is an overall nerf, not a buff, whether you compare it to having to pay an extra 30 points and 2 bodies to access your guarding rule, or comparing to the previous big squad where it's 10 points cheaper, but for that cost you lose an entire stealth suit. Otherwise, the majority of the rules seem fairly similar, besides I guess fairly situational grenades and potentially spotting things in melee combat with the pistol access. It doesn't feel a nerf so bad that stealth suits won't still be good, but on the other hand, having any kind of nerf to stealth suits, which are a fairly key unit to the entire faction and its firepower, does feel kind of dangerous territory for Tau, and it does seem like it's going to be a small nerf to the army as a result, and perhaps isn't the best general feels for Tau players as well, given that people with a lot of stealth suits already, which will be most of you might have odd numbers of suits left over, though I guess at least these ones are similar enough that you wouldn't need to necessarily update to the new models unless you wanted to. That isn't always the case with a model update. It might also not be the best feels for the shiny new tech that's deployed for the Empire, being essentially a bit of a downgrade, at least in the first instance. As an army balance point of view though, I must admit it might not be the worst idea to try and balance the Tau in a way that stealth suits aren't absolutely critical to the army's firepower. Maybe having a slightly bigger squad can make them a bit more take and leave, and then they can try and make it so the rest of the army can function a bit more on its own 2 feet without them. It's still probably not going to be the best feeling for a datasheet update for followers of the greater good though. Finally, beyond the main datasheet drops, we've had 3 more small changes. The Deathwatch datasheets gained the Gravis keyword for the Gravis veteran, whether it's the Decimus kill team or the Aquila kill team. For the Decimus team, I believe that means they can't go inside impulsors anymore, which is quite a big change. I guess Gravis in general can't ride on impulsors normally. Feels like they maybe could have made an exception for these guys though, just given that it's only one Gravis model in the squad. That seems like an unnecessary nerf to a datasheet that already seems a bit behind the power curve for the Deathwatch. I further cements them as second place to the standard veteran squad, at least in my mind. I guess if they get any sort of serious balance help though, it probably won't be until the next balance day slate update or after. Otherwise, weirdly enough, there was a tiny buff to Aethon Shaan, who certainly didn't need any sort of buff. They've just made his special rule a little bit more flexible. He's got a weird sort of charge buff which can give you some rerolls, but at the price of having to force you to charge that unit if the Space Marines are within 12. So in reality, if you wanted to charge something else, it could be a bit of a double-edged sword. They've just tweaked that slightly to say that he doesn't always have to declare that if it's not going to be helpful. I guess in theory, if it's late game and there's 2 opponents' units left, being forced to put it on one of them might mean that you rob one unit of being able to charge something. In reality, it's not exactly the biggest change in the world, but does make a bit more sense rather than being forced to use a rule that might not necessarily help you in every circumstance. This one doesn't really change its use too much in my opinion. It's still going to be one of the very best models in the entire game until Games Workshop get around to updating him. If he makes it through the December balance pass without points rises or a rules change or something, I'd be very surprised. Then finally for rules, we have Tigurius' new Combat Patrol. For those that play the Combat Patrol game mode, this is the one with Tigurius, 3 Blade Guard, 3 Aggressors, 5 Intercessors and 5 Reavers. The Combat Patrol is called Eye of Ultramar and comes with the normal things like objectives, enhancements and a couple of stratagems. Tigurius can gain fights first or ignores cover. The core rule is the Oath of Moment without the boosted +1 to wound, and they get a -1 to wound stratagem, advance and charge, and getting a lethal hits ability. In any case, really quite a big chunk of rules updates there. It feels like to me at first impressions the thing that's going to make the single biggest impact are those Victrix Honor Guard. They look pretty utterly murderous for 210 points right now, particularly for the first squad with the Ancient and Champion, though even beyond that, it looks like a very good unit for the points cost. I guess we'll be seeing them a fair bit in Ultramarines Detachment. It's going to be interesting to see exactly what combos of characters and squad sizes get used for them in competitive play. I'm sure we'll have at least some people going Calgar plus the new Ultramarine detachments. Otherwise, a bit of a nerf for the stealth suits for this Tau. The Wolf Scouts look interesting and fun at least, and new style Calgar and Cato Sicarius look interesting and playable, though I'm a bit less convinced they're going to be massively strong for their points cost compared with the Victrix Guard. Let me know your thoughts on the updates or anything I missed down in the comments below. That's about it for this one, though I'll just cycle back to Titan's Terrain, the video sponsor, briefly, and talk about their folding cardboard terrain sets. As mentioned, there's a fair few pros and cons of these ones versus some of the other terrain sets out there. It's most certainly a different offering to most. As mentioned, I feel like the biggest USP of these is being able to easily store and transport it, folding the tiles down easily into a box that's about the same size as a standard board game. It's far cheaper than an entire board of Games Workshop terrain, though most third-party stuff is, admittedly. Maybe somewhat comparable to kind of mid-range MDF, and it doesn't need any painting or assembly. It's ready to go pretty much immediately, which can be useful for people with limited time and wanting to dedicate hobby hours towards their armies. It certainly does come with some trade-offs though. It's a bit less sturdy and hard wearing versus plastic and MDF, given it's made of cardboard. It needs to look after it a bit more, and it doesn't have the weight bearing capacity to support models in the upper floors of ruins so well. The grid layout can make it a bit less flexible than some as well. They can gain some flexibility by rotating the tiles. I personally just use a little bit more terrain on top of this to break up some of the major firing lanes for use in 40k. It doesn't exactly make tournament approved layouts, but I've certainly seen good anecdotes about it being used for a solid casual terrain set. For the offerings and types of it that they have, they've got 2 main sets available at the moment. A Forgotten Furnace one, which is sort of like a Chaos Foundry, lots of glowing factories and runes and things. And then they've got a more standard Shattered Hive style one, lots of bombed out buildings and armoured containers. Those 2 each have a big centerpiece expansion set as well, a cathedral type thing for the city and a spire for the factory. These ones being big buildings that are essentially made of 2 tiles pushed next to each other. In any case, thanks to them for sponsoring this one. You can find them links down in the video description. I'll leave that there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you've been enjoying the videos on the channel, Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description down below. Channel patrons get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.